Welcome. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. This is a continuation of reading from Living in the Private. Again, just to remind everyone, educate yourself, verify everything. Disclaimer notice, this content is provided for educational purposes, omissions and errors accepted, and is not lawful advice. I'm going to read through chapters 4, 5 and 6, which covers crossing the line, your public trust, public servants. Crossing the line. A sovereign man, woman, lives in their private capacity, possessing unalienable rights and properties. They may volunteer to act in a public capacity, granted revocable privileges and benefits, which are the mere civil rights of an artificial legal person. Artificial legal persons of many kinds, presuming a franchise benefit to the state's legal society. Legal persons include citizen, resident, inhabitant, driver, individual, taxpayer, voter, and owner. They are servants transmitting utilities, debtors, descendants, or incompetent wards of the state. Incorporation transfers anything from the sovereign national law of the land, common law jurisdiction, into the foreign international law of the sea, admiralty maritime jurisdiction. Whenever people act in a public capacity as public servants, they are accountable to the state if they fail to perform their role as contracted. Whenever people live in their private capacity as private sovereigns, they are accountable in common law if they cause harm to any living soul. If you act in the role of a legal person, you are crossing the line into the lower world of the legally dead, surrendering your unalienable rights as a living soul. So we have a contents table, living private, legal, law of the sea, de facto, universal law, laws of God, creator, universe, commercial law, contract law, law merchant, universal commercial code, common law, private, cause no harm, loss, or fraud to other living souls, statutory legislation, public, statutory acts, bills, codes, rules, legislative instruments, franchises, precedents, debtors, wards of the state, lawful, law of the land, de jure, fiction, dead, public. People create governments to serve, not rule. I repeat, people create governments to serve, not rule. A representative governments to serve, not rule. A representative government, elected freely and fairly, is by definition a public trust, instituted to serve private sovereign people in the common law jurisdiction. Such a sovereign government is an unincorporated common law assembly or a body politic, not an incorporated body. The sovereign people place their trust in the governance skills of their elected representatives who are elected into office, not into power. Your representative goes in your place. The sovereign people are the employers of the representatives and all government employees. Without exception, the employees of this public trust are public servants, working for the private sovereign people. Everyone in government service, from your who governs in the right of the people to the lowest employee, derives their limited authority from the private sovereign people, and each such public servant has a fiduciary duty to serve as a trustee for the private sovereign people who are the beneficiaries of their trust. Sovereignty resides in the people, whose power is the source of law. Your government is public, employing numerous public officers, each of whom swears an oath of allegiance according to law, as written in the Oaths and Declarations Act 1957. Your head of state is the 57. Your head of state is the principal trustee for the law of the land, the de jure common law, acknowledged in the Imperial Laws Applications Act 1988. After the commencement of this Act, the common law of England, including the principles and rules of equity, so far as it was part of the laws of New Zealand immediately before the commencement of this Act, shall continue to be part of the laws of New Zealand. It is therefore the sworn duty of all public officers to uphold the common law embodied in the private sovereign people. If the people's sovereign authority, partly delegated to their government, is turned against the sovereign people, the public trust is betrayed. Sadly, centuries of systematic monetary have deeply subverted our government, which has been unincorporated to serve the debt money system of bondage, extracting wealth from a global power for a global power elite who rule at the expense of the operated to serve the debt money system of bondage, extracting wealth from a global power for a global power elite who rule at the expense of the majority. Nevertheless, the foundation of our government is the public trust, over which the people are the sovereign power of the nation. The beginning of freedom is the realization that your public trust is there to serve your life, not take it. The power of your life is found in your self-awareness, for we intuitively know that no other man or woman was born as our master. Freedom is your right, but it is not given, but exercised. It is, and it is held by attention to your living rights. Public servants, foreign, the private sovereigns, who public servants serve the private sovereigns, who, having formed the institution of a freely elected, unincorporated government for the benefit of the institution of a freely elected, unincorporated government for the benefit of the people, are governed by their consent. The institution of a freely elected government automatically forms a trust in common law, with the people as beneficiaries and their public servants as trustees. The public servants have a fiduciary duty to serve the beneficiaries of the trust. Many public servants swear an oath of office to serve according to law, which is their de jure common law, also known as the law of the land. Public servants do not swear an oath to serve in de facto Admiralty Maritime Commerce, also known as law of the sea. However, members of the Private Bar Association swear an oath to serve the Bar Association, which presents a conflict of interest in matters of government and justice. This subversion of the common law courts supports the crime of personage, knowingly law courts a living man or woman as a legal fiction, a form of corporation, such as an artificial person, trust, public utility, or foundation, Personage is committed by deceptively mirroring the name, causing, and it is perpetrated by bartery, the crime of bringing false claims in court. The term barratry appropriately comes from the Bar Association. Public servants include all officers of the law. Most frontline police officers perform two roles. As peace officers, they uphold the law, discharging their impartial duties under oath according to keep the peace, and are protected by a public bond having limited liability. As policy officers, they enforce statutes which prescribe the legal terms and conditions of contracts with penalties, etc. In the de facto administrative maritime jurisdiction, also known as law of the sea, this role dominates their training and time. Policy officers do not swear an oath to enforce statutes. They are not protected by a public bond having unlimited full commercial liability. Police officers are either on duty, under oath, and in the public, or off duty. Not under oath and in the private. Conducting private commerce, for your uppercase name, in admiralty maritime jurisdiction is not part of the sworn duty of a police officer. Conducting private commerce in support of the debt money system can be described as a private mercenary abdicating their oath. Police officers or policy enforcement officers have no jurisdiction over any living, breathing man or woman unless that man or woman consents to that jurisdiction. All legal jurisdictions over a man or woman requires their consent, and so all presentments of a police officer by consent. What people think of our service in New Zealand is by consent and cannot afford to lose the support of the people we serve. So the police officer have two columns, one for policy officer, one for peace officer. Common law people, admiralty maritime commercial jurisdiction, law of the land, law of the sea, non-incorporated office, incorporated office, public servant with public oath of office and bond, private contractor with no public oath of office and bond. Holding public oath as in honour, office as in dishonour. Public capacity, limited liability. Private capacity, full commercial liability. Peace officer, constable. Law enforcement officer. Keeping the peace, upholding justice, serving and protecting people. Collecting revenue, performing commerce, enforcing statutory contracts. Of the people, by the people, for the people. Of the corporation, by the corporation, for the corporation. The officer must have probable cause or an articulable reasonable suspicion that you are committing or about to commit a crime of harm to a living soul. The officer must establish that you are acting in the role of an artificial legal person, which is consent by joinder in order to exercise jurisdiction. While a living soul, you are in the common law obliged not to cause harm, loss, or fraud to other living souls. While acting as a person, you are under contract obliged to perform according to the terms and conditions of statutes. Only if there is a victim of a crime can an officer establish jurisdiction over you. Only a legal person, corporation, can be taken to court for an offence. Crimes Act 1961, Section 9. No one shall be convicted of any offence at common law. Penalties are statutory for the legal person, so do not apply to living men or women. De jure in law, de facto in practice. The police cannot stop you, question you, detain you, arrest you, search you or charge you without your consent if there is no victim. Ultimately, the administrative courts cannot fine you or imprison you without your consent, but if at any point you understand the accused proof and reasonably establish your crime. In any detention, seizure, or arrest, the police officer must establish that you are acting in joinder to an artificial legal person name created by the state and controlled by statutes. The officer bears the burden of establishing your freely given consent. A police officer who stops you in the course of your lawful business without your consent or articulable probable cause is assailing you. Dealing with assailants. Number one, identify your assailant, their motive and jurisdiction. Number two, require verification of a crime. No crime equals no jurisdiction. Number three, be polite, stay on point. You have the right not to be arbitrarily stopped, detained, or arrested by chance, whim, or impulse. There must be an articulable and reasonable suspicion that you're involved in a crime against a victim, and a witness can be a peace officer with first-hand knowledge and evidence who is willing to write an affidavit under penalty of perjury and full commercial liability making the accusation of the crime. You have the right not to answer questions. You have the right not to provide government-issued ID. You have the right to ask questions. To control people, the police rely on ignorance of the law is no excuse. The police oath. I do swear that I will well and truly serve our sovereign lady the Queen, entered into a written contract with the Queen as the head of state law. The oath requires police officers to carry out duties impartially, fairly, with goodwill and without malice, discharge all duties to the best of his/her ability, and uphold the law, prevent offences, and keep the peace until legally discharged. Thank you.